sales is all about communication. And often we're brought in to talk to companies, and here's the scenario that they lay out. They say, we have done a ton of work to refine our sales presentation, and we've got this beautiful deck, and we get in front of a customer and we share this deck and we frame how we can help our clients. And the challenge then becomes, everybody seems engaged, everybody seems to like it, they leave, and then nothing happens. And the reality is, pitching is really about is really sales 1.0. In today's world, it's about engaging, and that's really important because often in today's world, the buyer is further down a path at deciding what they want to do and how they want to do it than the sales rep has any insight to. So let me share a little bit of data with you right here. We always know that sales is kind of a numbers game. So let me share a little bit of data with you. First of all, in a poll from Serious Decisions, some research that they did with their client base, they found that the perception of buyers is that 71% of the time sales reps talk too much. They're talking too much. They're telling them, not selling to them. Another data point for you, and this is from discovery.org, and in their research, they found that, again, buyers say that only about a third of the sales reps that are calling on them can manage and have an effective conversation with an executive. I found that fascinating. That means that 2 out of 3 times that an executive agrees to meet with a sales rep, they don't find that meeting effective. That's scary. Another piece of data for you from HubSpot, based on the current state of sales in the B2B sales space, they're estimating that 40% of us are not going to make our quota this year. 40% of sales reps are not hitting their goal. And so the question is, why? And are there some things that we can do differently? And then last but not least, this is information from gong.io. So unlike some of the other research where it's reported or people are selecting what their impressions is, Gong actually records sales calls and has an artificial intelligence engine that analyzes it. And the difference between top performers and what they call star performers is that top performers ask more questions and don't dominate the conversation. And it's not a huge difference, but it is a subtle difference that their talk to listen ratio is different than that of the average performer. So how do we improve that talk to listen ratio? Our goal is to reduce the amount of time that we talk. There's certainly a place for us to talk, but to really take opportunities throughout the sales call to learn and understand and confirm what the prospect's point of view and perspective is. And selling is really about understanding their point of view and perspective, knowing where we need to maybe persuade or influence it, and then connecting to that with our capabilities down the road. So context in selling is critical. And the only way that we have to create context is through our ability to ask questions and engage the prospect and get them sharing information with us. So let's kind of talk about, now that we've kind of framed what this issue is, what exactly are we going to cover in the next 30, 45 minutes? And let me also say that I will be answering any questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and share those with us, and we'll address those not only at the end, but if there's an appropriate time during today's session to go through this. So we're going to talk about some of the reasons that good questions just improves our sales productivity. The more we ask, the more we know. The more we know, the better we can be. We're going to talk about how to ask these questions in the context of really understanding their buying process, and especially in situations where we are invited into a prospect. So when someone sends us a phone call, sends us an email, picks up the phone and calls us and say, hey, we're going through a process to evaluate vendors. Come in and tell me what you do. It's so easy to forget or overlook the importance of understanding that context before we come in and pitch. So we're going to kind of talk about that buying process and how we can use our questioning process to better understand it, synchronize to it, and ultimately improve our ability to win. We're going to introduce 4 specific different types of questions, and they're all important to use in various junctures of our sales process and our communication plans with our prospects. And we're going to talk about how you use them, when you use them, give you some examples, and share those with you so that you can take those question types and create questions that you can have in your arsenal to use in different types of sales situations. And then it kind of goes without saying, but it is important. If we are going to prepare for meetings and ask good questions, we also have to be prepared to actively listen. So we'll talk about some tips and techniques to ensure that we are actively listening and understanding exactly what the answers are to all these good questions, because it is important to understand that context and the perspective so we know where we need to go next in our sales strategy. So let's kind of start with kind of what we call channeling a few really smart people. Questions have been around from the beginning of time. And if I kind of talk about some of these people starting all the way on the left-hand side, Socrates was the Greek philosopher 2,400 years ago who made the point of teaching questions to understand the other person and their point of view. He was not considered a great Greek philosopher because he had all the answers. He was considered a great Greek philosopher because he asked a lot of questions. And that became the Socratic method of engaging. And it's used from consulting practices, from sales executives to teaching and facilitating. And that is kind of that respectful inquiry to get information. The next gentleman moving over to the left, who some of you may or may not know who he is, he's a gentleman by the name of Edward Schein. And Edward Schein wrote a book called Humble Inquiry. And he's really had a notable impact on the organizational development field and consulting field for building consensus and understanding how to build consensus in solving problems. The third person, many of us probably recognize because she is a more contemporary, if you will, example of someone who is a master at interview, and that's Oprah Winfrey, who was able through her questioning process in her decades of being a North American television personality, get people to talk about things that they never thought they would talk about and get people to share that. And that's because she was very, very good at questions, very good at rapport, and very respectful of everyone and how they answered questions. And then the fourth person, interestingly enough, if anybody recognized this gentleman, is Dale Carnegie. And Dale Carnegie wrote a book many, many years ago called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the whole premise of the book is that if you want to win friends and influence people, you need to ask questions. You need to demonstrate that you're interested in them before you can be interesting to them. And that's a really powerful lesson that we all have to learn. If we want to be interesting, which at the end of the day, as sales professionals talking to people, we do want people to be interesting and interested in what we're saying. We first have to demonstrate that we are interested in them. A mentor of mine always says, people don't know how much you care, or people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you demonstrate your interest in them by focusing on them and asking questions. So let's talk about why this is. Well, trust and rapport is developed over time with between sales reps and their potential buyers based on the communication that we have. And trust and rapport is important in sales. I don't think anybody's going to argue, hey, I can do business with people. I don't care if they trust me or not. People want to do business with people they trust. And people tend to trust people that understand them and to a certain extent see the world through the same lens that they do. It's why we always say you don't talk about things like politics in business, because you can immediately discredit yourself just by having a different point of view than somebody. So we avoid talking about those controversial, very polarizing topics that could immediately break that trust and rapport with us. The other thing that's really powerful about the questions that we prepare to ask is, in and of itself, that begins to build our credibility. The fact that I can engage a prospect and ask questions of them that are relevant and topical and drive the conversation a certain way often just demonstrates in action the credibility that I know what I'm talking about by the fact that I'm working through those questions with them. And always in sales, we want to first focus on the prospect. There is a time to educate the prospect on who we are, what we do, and how we do it. But before that, it's really important to focus on the prospect. You know, the example that we often use is, if we want them to agree that our solution is the best solution, don't we first want to make sure we have agreement on what problems we're trying to solve and why those problems are worth solving before we ever try to get them to agree to our solution? We don't want to be a solution in search of a problem. We want to be problem experts that we can then accurately, effectively, and productively position our solution with. And asking questions and listening to answers is the only way we learn. You know, all my life I've heard from teachers and bosses and colleagues, there is no stupid question. Ask good questions if you have them. And I would say the only stupid question you have is the one that you have that you never raise. And we'll talk about that. Now, we'll talk about, in a business sales context, why we ask certain questions when we ask them. But we also want to make sure that we hear those answers in our prospects' point of view in their own words. One of the keys to selling, and certainly as you are selling in the executive offices, that when you have an opportunity to meet with those executives, is to really make sure that we're engaging those executives and not pitching them. You know, I think about even people in my personal life. When someone calls me, and as a matter of fact, it happened about 30 minutes before this phone call started, I answered my phone, and it was a sales rep from clearly in a call center, extremely loud, very lot of background noise, who didn't know my name, but immediately went into a pitch. Started telling me what they had for me, didn't even know who I was, if I was interested, why I would talk with them. It was really kind of rude, for lack of better words, and disrespectful. His objective was to get as much information out before I got annoyed and hung up. I don't know if this strategy works for this gentleman who was telemarketing to me, but in the long run, it won't get him the results, at least with me, that I think he had hoped to get. And he was not engaging at all. It was all about him talking at me, not even to me. I would say it was at me. So thinking about that, we don't want to be perceived that way. We don't want to be perceived as arrogant. We want to be confident, but we don't want to be cocky. And cocky, I think, shows up when we start talking about how great we are before we even know what or if there could be a reason for them to listen to us. So pitching too early can really be detrimental. And the other thing that happens when we pitch too early is we give them a reason not to choose us, and we might not even know what it is. We could start to talk about things that we think are important to us that they don't think are important, and all of a sudden we've given them a reason not to buy from us, and will miss that. So engaging is such an important strategy in today. So let me start by sharing with you the first three types of questions that we teach all of our clients to ask. And questioning really is the fuel of sales. And specifically, it is definitely the fuel of the value selling framework. Because what we teach people to do is understand why, how, when, and if someone is going to buy from them. And think about it. If I'm a salesperson, isn't that what I want to know? I want to know why, when, how, and if you're going to buy from me. And if I can do that effectively and understand those things, I can now be very deliberate and purposeful in helping make sure that you answer those questions positively toward me. So what are these three types of questions that we're going to start with? The first one is what we call an open-ended question, and it's really designed to get the prospect to talk. Open-ended questions do not have a finite answer. They're not yes or no. By definition, they're the opposite of closed, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are and how those might sound in a few minutes. The second type of question that we're going to teach you to ask is confirming questions. Confirming questions are our ability to actively reflect what we heard. It is an active listening technique that we deploy in our sales process to confirm that we understood and that we heard what we've heard. And we'll talk a little bit more about that one. And then the third type of question that we teach our sales reps that go through the value selling framework to ask is probing questions. Probing questions are closed questions, and what I mean by that is they typically have a finite answer, and most often that answer is yes or no, true or false, but they're used to expand what we heard in the open-ended question. And we'll give you some examples of what that might look like. So let's get into these open-ended questions. Open-ended questions typically start with what, how, why. Can you tell me about this? Please describe. And they're designed to get the customer speaking. Now, I often hear sales reps say, hey, I do ask good open-ended questions, and I ask a lot of them in my discovery session. But one of the differences, again, based on the Gong research that we referenced before, is open-ended questions can be used throughout the sales process. And open and probing questions, for that matter, can be used throughout that. One of the other differences that Gong found between what they called their star performers and their average performers is that average performers ask anywhere from 12 to 15 questions at the beginning of a meeting. Then they start to talk more and stop asking questions. Where high-performing star reps tend to manage the entire conversation and include questions throughout that. And we'll talk, so think about that. Am I just front-loading questions and then do I start to talk? Or am I using this questioning process to maintain engagement throughout the entire conversation and communication between myself and the prospect? So again, different ways that you can ask those open-ended questions are as simple as, tell me about how you do this here. Tell me about what led you to call us today. Why are you starting this? What is your process? How do you see this unfolding? And really diving into that. And at Value Selling, we teach reps not just to ask these open-ended questions about the circumstances and the situation that a prospect might have, but also really diving into some specifics about, hey, what are the challenges that you're facing? Why are those challenges important to solve now? Why Are you focused on this? How are you going to make this decision? What is it that you're looking for? So really expanding these open-ended questions beyond just circumstances and situations is critical to be effective in sales. And then, sometimes these questions can just be as simple as, "Hey, will you please share with me a little bit more about that? Can you elaborate on that one? I'm not sure I understood that," or "Please provide me more details or describe exactly how that works here." And the open-ended questions, again, are really no right or wrong answer, just designed to get the prospect talking. We often follow up those open-ended questions then with probing questions. And so when I think of the word probe, I think of very targeted, pinpointed questions. And there's two reasons that we would want to be asking lots of probing questions. Number one, to understand more detail in any aspect of the answer that we get from an open-ended question. That might be a reason to probe deeper. I want to dive deeper into that specific area that you brought up. The second area of probing, and one of the things that we often work with our clients to help them get better at, is to introduce other elements that maybe didn't surface in the open-ended question. So for example, if someone was to call me and ask me open-ended questions about, how we manage our workflow in a certain area, and I answered that question but left out maybe the people that were involved or the background or the type of application that we might use to manage our workflow, those could all be probing questions that a sales rep might want to expand that with. So probing questions are really important, and they're very valuable at helping us to expand whatever it is we're talking about. So if I'm trying to learn about the challenges that you have in a certain area and you give me 3, I may ask additional probing questions to see if I can build that problem list up to 5 or 6 or 7 people or 7 different problems to try to get a better comprehensive view at that. So we have a number of different types of probing questions that we have here as examples. So if I'm probing for challenges, for example, as I just said, I might try to diagnose or expand the diagnosis and say, is it because of these other things too? Is it because of this fact or that fact, to see if I can't get buy-in and expand that problem list. Just as important to understanding their problems, I might also try to expand their view of solution. So if somebody calls me and says, "Hey, Julie, we need some sales training," I might say, "Are you considering online training? Are you looking to send somebody to an upcoming open to the public class? Are you looking to do something in conjunction with your sales meeting?" I might try to add some additional solution probing questions to get a better idea of the details and the specificity around what you think you need. Very important, so that when I do start to talk to you about how I might be able to support you, I've got a better context and can position that in the context of what you've said you need. But we can add probing questions throughout the whole buying process in qualifying that opportunity, from value to identifying all of the people that need to get involved to creating a plan for them to actually implement and realize the value of a partnership with us. So probing questions are a great mechanism for us to get more specificity, to get more clarity, and to deliberately and purposefully create context where I can best position my capabilities and be as successful as possible. Now, the third type of question that we teach people to ask is confirming questions. And confirming questions are a component of active listening. And the way this works is, if I hear you say something, I play it back to you. And the power of playing it back to you, first of all, I will deepen the relationship because I am demonstrating that I have listened, that I have understood, and I'm providing you an opportunity to provide clarity. For many of us, our sales cycles happen over time. So we may be using confirming questions also to ensure that nothing has changed from the point that we had our initial shared understanding to make sure that it is still a shared understanding. So confirming questions are certainly used in different areas to wrap up components of conversations and make sure we understood everything correctly, but they're also used to make sure that over time we're on the same page. And so some of the examples that we, use and people take into their own words is, hey, let me make sure I understood this correctly and play back exactly what I've heard. Here's what I just heard you say, and share that. The key to good confirming questions is that they accurately reflect the language that the prospect uses. So if I have a prospect who calls me and says, hey, Julie, what we're really trying to do is level up our sales team. And the prospect describes what that means and how what level they don't have and where they're going to do that. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you know what, level up means to improve sales productivity. If I change those words when I confirm back with that particular prospect, I am likely to lose him or her. So our objective is to ask these confirming questions and be very specific in using the client's language when we confirm back, which is powerful, which means a couple of things. If I know I'm going to be asking confirming questions, I likely need to do two things. Number one, I do need to listen. I can't be thinking about what I'm going to say next. I need to be listening and taking it all in. And then second of all, I probably need to be a skilled note taker. Because I don't know about you, but for me, I have a tough time remembering what I said 10 minutes ago or what, and I need to give myself some notes so that I can then go back and confirm exactly what I heard. If I don't take notes, I am likely to miss something, and if I miss something that's critical from the prospect's point of view, I could actually hurt myself as opposed to use this confirming question to further or advance this opportunity. So skilled note taking, and there's a lot of research out there right now on the power of note taking itself for human memory. And thinking about how you take notes is really important. This isn't about note taking per se, but if I'm going to ask confirming questions, I know for me, I have to actively listen and take notes and be able to organize those in order to be reflective with my confirming questions. Now, there's one other question type that value selling teaches our sales reps to ask, and we call these anxiety questions. And the reason I pull these out separately from the OPC, Open, Probe, and Confirm, is anxiety questions are very, very situational and are not needed in every sales cycle. Where the Open, Probe, and Confirm, we use every sales cycle that we're going through to create a prospect out of a suspect and ultimately convert that prospect to a customer or a client. I mean, that is what we do. That is what sales does. We are the revenue manufacturing engine for our company that takes those suspects to prospects and prospects to customers or clients. So anxiety questions are questions that we need to use in certain situations. And a couple of those situations include maybe we are not getting any insight from the prospect on what's going on in their business and why would they maybe consider doing something differently in the first place. At Value Selling Associates, we believe in the fundamental principle that people need a reason to change. And although it would be great that their reason to change was not that they weren't already a client of mine, usually their reason to change has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with what's going on in their business and where they are putting time, energy, funding, and resource to build or grow their business. So that could be a place where I could use an anxiety question. Number two, I often could use an anxiety question if I sense that the buyers or prospect that I'm talking to view the solution doesn't include me. Maybe they think they can go build their own program. Maybe they're going to try to do something with a consultant as opposed to a methodology firm. Maybe they think software and analytics will solve their problem as opposed to people skills that on how to better engage. But if I get the sense, and the only reason I would get the sense is because I'm asking questions and they're telling me that the solution doesn't include me, I may use anxiety questions to be a little bit provocative in nature and get them to think that maybe they're missing something. And then anxiety questions can also be used to create some urgency around timing. So what are anxiety questions? Well, anxiety questions are provocative in nature that challenge status quo. So they focus on the implication, the consequence, or the risk of not doing something often. So maybe it is focused on the risk of not upskilling or level upping your sales force today, because if you wait till August or September, too much time will have passed and you will not be able to impact your 2019 results. And so we
Julie,
focus on, yes.
Sorry, you're covering so much great information. I do have a question that came up, and that is, could you use an anxiety question at the beginning of your meeting?
You could. So but I think it would have to be very situational. So anxiety questions are challenging. So the idea is if you don't have any trust or rapport and you come in and start with completely challenging the executive, it might not help you in terms of developing trust and rapport. So I would be caution that. Now, if I ask an open-ended question and I get nothing, either the buyer or the executive that I'm talking to is completely overconfident, or they are complacent, or, and I don't mean this in a really mean way, but they're ignorant to what they could be missing, then a well-placed anxiety question might work. And in those situations, I might use them along the model of leveraging third-party research to surface a concern that they might not have. So if I have somebody who doesn't think that they need, if I'm calling on a VP of sales and he doesn't think his sales reps need to ask better questions, I might take one of those statistics that was early on in the slide deck here and say, are you aware that there's a differential between high-performing reps and middle-of-the-road reps? And it all has to do with how much they talk versus how much they inquire in a sales call. And are you confident that your people are not dominating the conversation? So,
no, that's good.
Yeah, there could be a way. And we use anxiety in our marketing campaigns. We talk about inserting anxiety questions and anxiety in the whole concept of our marketing campaigns, whether it's one-on-one, account-based, or mass marketing, to surface and engage the buyer at kind of that emotional level. Anxiety questions, when they're used well, will actually get a bit of a adrenaline flow through your prospect. They will actually get that, ooh, haven't thought about that. You really want kind of that emotional reaction to open up their mind to think about new possibilities.
So that could be used also, you mentioned marketing. So if they're not wanting to meet, or I'm trying to get a meeting, I could use maybe something like that to get a meeting.
As a matter of fact, when we work with clients on improving their prospecting and their sales or business development reps' ability to fill the pipeline, we often talk about creating campaigns that hit emotional triggers, one of which is anxiety, another one might be influence, and a third one being motivation. So really thinking about how we can craft those messages to get that emotional response and get some engagement going. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. So now let's talk about how we manage this conversation so that when we're talking with prospects, it does not feel like we're interrogating them. One of the reasons that, one of the big differences between an interrogation and a conversation is our ability to actively listen and then ask the best next question of that prospect. And so I find that what we normally do in a sales situation is we go back and forth. I have here toggle between open and probing questions. So I'm going to ask some open-ended questions or an open-ended question to learn what you think. And then I'm going to follow that on with potentially a probing question. And depending on the answer to that probing question, I'm probably going to ask for a little more information on that. So we go back and forth between these open and probing questions. And where if we were interrogating them, we would have a checklist of questions that we would go through regardless of the answer. So the key to doing this conversation is really actively listening and then asking the next best question based on their answer. Do I need more information on that specific topic? Have they given me information that really is irrelevant to what I need to talk about to be successful in representing my company? And therefore, how would I pivot to get the conversation in a different way? Or how do I probe to expand and fully get more information on the specific topics that we're talking about? And this isn't just in the discovery mode of sales. And that's where I think a lot of sales reps feel really good. Like, hey, I've got some great questions that I ask for discovery, and then I immediately move into, let me tell you what I got and how much it costs. And we want to expand that discovery, not just beyond, like I said, not just about circumstances and situations, but beyond that to really understand why, how, when, and if they're going to buy from us. So what we're going to focus on the questions is creating good, simple questions. I often hear sales reps, like the first time they start to really focus on the questions, start to ask really compound questions, or questions that actually the answer is embedded in it. So think about those questions that you can start to ask. As simple as, tell me about it. If I'm focusing on the challenges that you have, and I know there's about 15 challenges that if you have those, you probably need me. You may not know that yet, but you probably need to work with my firm if you've got these problems. I want to then be prepared to probe for them if you don't answer those in your open-ended question. One of the tips that one of our associates always talks about is many salespeople are very uncomfortable with pauses or gaps in the conversation. So they'll ask a question, and then if the prospect doesn't answer it right away, they will either answer it for them or they will move on to the next question. And sometimes pauses are really valuable in terms of allowing the prospect to get thoughtful. And this is harder and harder now that so much of our communication is virtual. I can't look at you if I'm on the phone with you to say, are you thinking about this? Did somebody else walk into your office? Have you lost interest and started doing multitasking? So we fill that pregnant pause, if you will, with ourselves because that's the only thing we control. See if you can't break that habit if that is something that you catch yourself doing. One of the keys is ask the question, and then our associate David up in Canada says, then take a sip of water. I just did that. Focus on that. That gives that natural pause to give them to think of it and answer it. So take a sip of water after you ask the questions and give them a point to actually answer them. But again, active listening is important. And I often hear from a lot of sales reps, they miss a lot of good information because after they ask the question, they're waiting to talk next. They're thinking about what they're going to say as opposed to really taking it in and understanding what comes into that. So here's some of the keys for success. And again, as you have questions, please share them. I'm happy to talk about them. Preparation is key. We want to have a good idea of the questions that we are prepared to ask to direct the conversation. So when I work with sales reps, the first thing I ask them before any sales call is, what is your objective of this meeting? And then what questions do you have to prepare to be in a position to achieve that objective? And thinking about that. Execution must be conversational. Hey, if you run into somebody that you haven't seen in 6 months at the airport, you are probably asking them lots of questions. You know how to ask open and probing questions. What we don't naturally do in social settings is ask confirming questions. So that is a habit and a skill that most sales reps have to get better at confirming not just what we learn in discovery, but information that we learn throughout the sales cycle. Open-ended questions are great. I've never had somebody argue about that. The question is, do we ask enough of them and on enough topics? And going beyond that kind of simple discovery into what their problems are to the entire sales process or the methodology that we teach. Probing questions must be relevant and purposeful. What I mean by that is we want to be very deliberate. If I know I'm in a competitive situation, I want to think through how I'm going to create need for what I do versus the competitive alternative, so that they come out of that thinking that I am differentiated. And really think through those purposeful questions. Confirming questions are not only good to further the relationship and allow the prospect to clarify, there are times during the sales process where confirming questions allow us to give mini trial closes. So one example of that is if I'm talking about why these problems that you've shared with me are worth solving, I'm going to try to get you to quantify the impact of that. And then once I understand how you're going to measure the impact of solving those problems and the impact on the business for that, I'm going to probably have an opportunity to ask you something like, we've talked about the value associated with that. Is that enough to motivate you to take action and do business with my company? So it allows me to do some trial closes throughout the sales process. I might not be asking them to buy today, but I want to know, are we on the right path to build the right case to buy tomorrow? And then anxiety questions, we keep those in our hip pocket. We keep those for when we need them. We can keep them, use them as we talked about at the beginning, maybe to frame a conversation and surface challenges that they might not have considered in the first place. But do that in a way that is opens up a new path of conversation or gets the prospect thinking about something differently than they may have thought about in the past. And my experience is that anxiety questions, to have some of those in your back pocket is really important. The reason being is if something isn't going well in a sales call, either the conversation isn't going well or we're not getting any information that allows us to start to qualify or create an opportunity, as sales reps, we then tend to get nervous, and that is when we start to talk more. And anxiety questions, if they're in their back pocket, we can pull those out and not have to come up with them on the fly. So here's a cartoon that I often share, and it's an oldie, but I think it's so good, and I just love it. Selling is not telling. Selling is not telling. And if we can stop any errant behaviors of sales reps that aren't as productive, it's the fact that they feel that they have to get all this information in the prospect's hand sooner rather than later. And really your job is to be consultative in nature. Back to humble inquiry and, making friends and driving conversations. It's all about the questions you ask. And being prepared to have those good conversations is powerful and will absolutely drive the efficacy of your sales results. And all I can tell you is if you really want to do a deep dive in creating specific questions that you can use immediately, consider joining us here in May in San Diego. Would love to have you. Join me for the 2 days, and we still have some space available in that workshop here in San Diego. And there are worse places that you could spend a couple days than San Diego, California. So here's what I would suggest you do. These learning opportunities, I think, are powerful, but the most important thing that happens as a result of this is what can you take today and put to practice in your next meeting. And maybe it's in 10 minutes or maybe it's in a day, but how can you do this? Think about what specific probing questions you might start to create and have those ready. Probing questions for many of us are harder to think through than open-ended questions. So I'm not giving you a call to action on the open-ended questions because they're not as hard, but really thinking through those probing questions and get ready for your next sales call. What's your objective and what do you need to know? That's what what do I need to know about what the prospect thinks? Maybe right now what I need to know is how they're going to make this decision. Maybe I need to know who's going to be involved in the decision. Maybe I need to know if they're going to make a decision. Maybe I need to know what's the process to build a case. Whatever that is, focus on the questions you can ask to do that. And then really force yourself to do some confirming questions. Actively listen in your next call. Take notes as best you can and actively reflect and play back what you hear. And it is such a powerful relationship building technique that can help further all of your conversations. As a matter of fact, I talked with a prospect a couple weeks ago who was telling me about a client that they recently closed, and it was a pure business development opportunity. So in other words, that he was a sales rep that reached out, met with somebody didn't think they needed to do anything differently, through a number of sales calls, created a need, created an opportunity, closed that opportunity. It was very successful. And he said that the prospect told him at the end that the reason he continued and is ultimately doing business with them is because the sales rep understood their problems so well that he had tremendous confidence. And he demonstrated that understanding by confirming, both in conversation and in writing, what he heard. So execute and listen, actively listen. That can be so powerful in your sales process.